Everett Performing Arts Center, this is KIRO Radio on Tour.
Tonight's in-person experience will help build a second Fisher House on Joint Base Lewis McChord.
KIRO Radio on Tour, featuring those behind the scenes and on the air at 97.3 KIRO FM. From Seattle's Morning News, Bill Radke, Linda Thomas, Tom Tangney, and reporter Tim Hake.
From the Ross and Burbank Show, producer Andrew Walsh and hosts Dave Ross and Luke Burbank.
From the Dory Monson Show, Ursula Reutin, producer Jake Skorheim, and host Dory Monson.
Auctioneer and host of the John Curley Show, John Curley.
The cast and crew of the Ron and Don Show, including producer Libby Denkman, Rachel Ring My Bell, Tony Big T Minor, on Mike Sean and off Mike Sean, Sean DeTore, and the hosts, Ron Upshaw and Don O'Neill.
This is KIRO Radio on Tour, Everett.
Now your host, program director of 97.3 KIRO FM, Larry Gifford.
Thank you. We love being in Everett. It's great to be here, home of the Boeing Dreamliner, home of the Aqua Sox, the Stealth, the Stingrays, and now home to KIRO Radio on Tour, Everett. There are precious few radio stations in the country that allow or support 17 hours of local programming every day, 100 local hours a week. And there are even fewer companies in radio that would allow Ron and Don on a stage in public. So this is a great night. We're so excited to be here. We're so honored that you're here to join us for this evening. We're here to answer your questions, to tell great stories, to laugh a lot, and to help bring awareness and raise a little money for a charity that's special to us called Fisher House. So starting off, I'm going to send most of these folks backstage to loosen up a little bit, and so we can tell stories about them while they're away. We're going to split up into 3 different panels through the evening so we can get to know everybody. And so right now, I'd like to welcome to the stage from Seattle's Morning News, Bill Radke, Linda Thomas, Tom Tangney, reporter Tim Hank, and from the John Curley Show, our auctioneer tonight, Mr. Fill-In, John Curley. All right, everybody settled? All right.
Yeah.
All right, so Bill Radke grew up the middle of 9 kids and once burned down a field trying to light some firecrackers. Bill, what's the most mischievous thing you've ever done in radio?
The most mischievous. Okay. This was in the early 90s. I was working at another radio station, a lesser radio station, and in town. And I was doing the morning show then, and I was reading the Seattle PI. For those of you younger folks, the Post-Intelligencer was a news source that was printed on a kind of wood pulp. So I would read that, and I had it spread out in front of me next to the console where I was doing my radio show, and I saw a photo in the PI of a hole. It was looking up from a living room through the roof because there was a hole in the roof. And some of you may remember this, actually. The story was that a plane had been flying over, I feel like it was in the north end, maybe Linwood or something, and it was cold, it was in the wintertime, and some sewage had seeped out from the lavatory of the plane, and it was so cold that as it fell, it formed an ICBM in the air over Linwood. It plunged into this family's home, crashed through their roof. Does anyone remember this?
I remember that.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. Into their living room and created this hole in the roof. And ironically, it hit the fan. And I told that story on the air, and that's pretty close to cussing on the air, isn't it? That seemed mischievous to me.
So I forgot to mention, we collected some questions. So they're in your program. If you haven't filled this out, feel free to fill this out throughout the night. We'll be collecting them through the evening so we can get your questions answered too. And then we also have a couple of microphones down here. So if you want to ask your question yourself, feel free to walk on down here and we'll turn those on and I'll bring you into the conversation. Linda Thomas.
Hi.
Linda, you've been in radio for a while. You gave up radio in 2000 to be a full-time mommy. How has being a mom changed the way you broadcast?
Actually, can I correct you?
Yeah.
My daughter was born in 1995. At that point, I was the morning news anchor at KIRO, and I decided it was more important to be home. So that's when I decided to be a stay-at-home mom for a while, and I've been doing freelance ever since. And then 2 years ago...
How's it feel to be corrected by Linda Thomas? Welcome
Happens
to my
every
world.
day.
Daily occurrence on our show, huh, Bill?
Yeah, but the thing is, I'm always right, okay? We just got to acknowledge that. Hello?
Or we let you think you are.
No, I am. You'll get your turn. So, 2 years ago, my dream came true and I got to come back to KIRO, and I am so happy to be here. The way my kids have changed my life, I mean, a few years ago, if you'd ask them what I do, they wouldn't even know, and they'd be like, now, radio, that's cute. What is that? Because they're young. But now my daughter's 16 and my son's 12, and they're a little more aware of what's going on in the world. And my life has changed in that stories are far more personal. It was my daughter who told me, Mom, you got to do a story about Joseph Kony. And so the next day, I came in and I did a story about him. And we all know how that story turned out. There was a controversy then with the person behind that video. But instead of just dropping it as a news story, I followed her journey. And she tried to get a bunch of classmates together for a meeting to try and continue to do this message that he inspired her to. It was her first attempt at activism, and there was nobody in the classroom. Nobody showed up to be with her. But it's been a journey for her, and she's still involved in different activities and activism at school, so I'm so proud of her. I guess the way it's changed is stories that I do now are personal. It's not just, I'm talking about something out there. I'm living these stories that I'm talking about.
And how does your daughter feel about being fodder for your newscasts?
My daughter probably doesn't like being on the radio. I've only used my kids very selectively. Very few times will you hear my kids on the radio. And the one time I put my son on the radio, I think he said something like, "Oh, Mom," but that's all I needed. I just needed that bit, so.
So Tom Tangney has done just about everything. He was a movie theater manager and a union projectionist. He had a 4.0 through his years at Seattle University.
He reminds us of that all the time.
He taught writing at the UW, worked as a document analyst for the Washington State Attorney General's office. Yeah. He joined KIRO in 1994. He's been an editor, an award-winning film critic, and now co-host of Seattle's Morning News. You could do anything. Why radio?
Well, the thing is, you know, I thought I was going to be an academic. I think I was born to be an academic, and through some kind of personal situations, I was working on my dissertation. I was going to get a PhD in English at the University of Washington, and my first daughter was born, and she was born almost 3 months premature, so she was one of those test tube babies that, you know, lived in the hospital for like the first 2 months of her life, and then she was in and out of the hospital for the first year, and that was just enough to kind of knock a procrastinator like me off the academic track. So what I did was my wife was a school psychologist, so she worked during the day. I had to find a job to work at night. I always loved movies. I'd been a movie critic, even from high school days. So I got a job at a movie theater so I could work at night, take care of the kid at home, and then work at night. Got into that and did that. You know, it's amazing. Once you have kids, your life just kind of like flies by. And I realized 5 years later, I was still a movie projectionist at the Harvard Exit Theater. And I really didn't feel that fulfilled. And I looked around at the kind of jobs that I could do. Well, one of the things is I decided, when I first graduated from college, I was thinking I had one of three options. One is go to law school, and I thought law school is for smart people that don't have any imagination. And I said, well, that's not for me. The second thing was grad school in English, which I think was my ideal. But the third thing was journalism, because I've always been a news junkie. So I'm now in my late 30s and decide I want to get back into journalism. That's something I think I could do. So I called the University of Washington, having already gotten a master's there in English, and said, I would like to get a degree or do something in journalism, and how about broadcast journalism? And they just laughed at me and they said, Tom, broadcast journalism is for the young and the beautiful. On both counts, I think you ought to go to newspapers. And I said, fair enough. I took a newspaper class there as a continuing ed teacher. I was twice as old as everybody else, you know, in the class. But through there, I sat in on a broadcast journalism class, just sort of unannounced. Happened to meet Dave Ross's producer, who was working on a master's in journalism there, and said, you know, you'd be great at KIRO. Somebody who I also worked with at the Varsity Theater was a desk assistant at KIRO, and so I kind of snuck into KIRO through the back door. As my friend used to call me, I was the world's oldest living desk assistant. I started at the very bottom, and I've been there for 17 years. And there are people that stayed in academia. They're no more happy. In fact, most of them are a lot less happy than I am in radio.
You know who else is less happy is anybody who's taken a newspaper job. I think it's a good call.
That's right.
For those of you who don't know, a newspaper was when they would
yeah, that's
print
right.
news
Something about
wood
pulp, yes. So anyway, that's a long-winded story to get me here. Sorry there, Larry.
Don't apologize. Tim Hake, Seattle native, grew up in Bellevue, graduated from the University of Washington, joined KIRO in 1978. Space Invaders was just coming out.
Nobody believes that. It's true.
Ashton Kutcher and Kobe Bryant were born that year. The first Star Wars movie was released that year. The Dow Jones closed at 6:05, and that was good. What do you remember about the early days of KIRO?
I remember writing a review of the Star Wars movie in a journalism class at the University of Washington. So, Tom, just like you.
There you go.
Yeah, I think I remember the stone tablets, the first medium for news. But actually, the technology is what's changed the most for me. I mean, we started out with the tablets and then advanced to the reel-to-reel tape recorders and then the cassettes. And then we actually went digital not too long ago. And so that's been the biggest change over the years in terms of how we actually gather the news and deliver it, sort of inside stuff. But amazingly, something we do today is exactly the same as what we did back in 1978 when Star Wars came out and I joined KIRO. And that is, we still file our reports from the field with a telephone. And the funny thing is, the telephones back then were better than the telephones we use today because I'm constantly complaining about the mobile phone service that drops out or whatever. But so, I mean, while most things are better, that's one piece of technology that we still need to improve. And so I try to get my interviews out in the field as opposed to do them on the telephone because of that. Dave Ross was just joining the station back then. I took him under my wing and taught him everything I know, and that turned out okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask how many people here listened, they know Tim Hake and Dan Restione and Ursula Reutin and Dave Ross and these people for this is your lives? You've grown up with this radio station? That's how it was for me.
My first reporter gig was right here in this town. I had a little office at the Snohomish County Courthouse. I think it was a council room or something for lawyers and the defendants. And so they converted that into a little office for me, gave me a telephone and a typewriter. And I filed reports there for several years here in Snohomish County. I remember going back into the courthouse and digging through the criminal filings, looking for something, anything interesting to talk about. It was kind of lean times back then.
Is it true, Tim, that you've never had another job? I mean, this was the first job you got right out of college, and you've had the same job the entire time?
Well, you mentioned your experience, and mine was a little different. I was at the University of Washington in my final quarter there before heading out into the big bad world, and one of the advisors came around with some internship offers. And there were 4 or 5 students who wanted an internship. I got handed KIRO Radio, and I was really disappointed. And let me explain, because I was afraid I was going to get lost in that big newsroom, and I could have, because when I showed up, it was a big deal. There were a lot of people there, a lot of big names. I've been here so long that I remember Wayne Cody. I remember when Steve Rabel Steve Rabel was an intern in the radio newsroom when I was there. He was just learning the ropes. So, but as it turned out, guess I did a good job because I went on vacation after I graduated, and I got a phone call when I got home asking if I would come join the team, which I did. That was almost 34 years ago.
Wow. There is a great video about the KIRO newsroom on YouTube if you search for it, and it features Tim on this high-tech newsroom from like 1988. It's really quite something to look at.
Can I just add that one of my most terrifying moments happened about that time. It was back in early 80s. We were one of the first newsrooms in the nation, radio newsrooms, to be computerized. We had a group come in, they installed a central processing unit, as they called it, back in the corner of the newsroom, and every so often, believe it or not, it would actually go funny. And we were supposed to go back and hit the button to reset it. Linda might remember this.
I do, yeah.
And you had to hit a button in a series of pushes to get it just right. And I was working early one morning, and I hit that thing, and I hit it again, and I hit it wrong, and it blew up. And this was the first time that we had to, we were deep into computers. We had the typewriters put away. They were in the back room somewhere. We dove head first into computerized. So we had nothing to fall back on.
We pulled out the news pulp, the newspaper, I think.
We pulled out the newspapers, we pulled out the typewriters, and we went back to the old ways. And it was, as I recall, several days before we were able to get those people from back east to come in and get the thing fixed.
Good job, Tim.
Honestly, I was terrified.
I know.
John Curley had a brief career as a weatherman before he was hired for Evening Magazine in 1995. He spent 14 years there. In 2011, you were hired by KIRO to host the night show. Why radio after all those years in TV?
I was broke.
Yeah, TV never pays well, does it, John?
No.
Oh, no, it pays well. I just spent it all. I forget who called me. I think I was filling in with Mike West a couple times for some people in the doing different segments and different shows. And then I got an agent, and then he said, they want to talk to you about having your own show. And this is before you, Larry. And I said, sure, that sounds like fun. So really, it was the thing that most people on TV look down on the people on radio, and for good reason.
You're kidding.
The feeling's mutual, believe me.
I'm sorry, did you hear something? And then, that's sort of the natural thing. After television, I went heavily into the tanning bed business. That didn't work out. So, let me say, my daughter's backstage. She's like, Dad, you have to explain to people what happened to your face. So I had 2 small red spots up here on my forehead. I went to the doctor, like, yeah, that's the beginning of skin cancer. That's basal cell carcinoma. It could turn into cancer. Let's get rid of it. It's just those red spots are annoying. So I guess they figured, just make my whole face red. It wouldn't really notice. But I had a chemical reaction to it, and that's why I look like this today. That was just yesterday.
I know.
I was a trooper this morning at 3 a.m. I walked in, people like, oh! It's like, is it that bad? Oh!
We always react that way to you,
Darn it.
But even Tim tried to be nice. He's like, huh.
So how would you say your experience on TV is different than radio?
Well, I said this last time, that radio is so real. I mean, when that red light is on, you don't get a second take, and there are people that are listening, and I mean really listening. It's not like television where they're deboning a chicken or whatever they're doing at that time. They're really, and especially the KIRO people are really, they're really tuned in. They're really tuned in. And radio and TV is only like 13 seconds or 15, and you do this, you run up and go, evening, everyone, and welcome to the show. Hey, coming to you from Ording, where a man has 2 tongues. We'll have that story here for you. But first, Jim Dever takes you to Everett, where we meet the Aqua Sox. And then you go, you got it? Daryl's like, oh, this show is so boring. I said, I know, I can't. So that's TV. I'm sorry. Oh, really? Honestly. Really, honestly, I said this last time. It's like we would do the show. I'd say to Daryl, we're going for a triple. Oh, don't do a triple. Triple's really hard. I said, no, I'm doing a triple this week. So a triple would be I would stand on one foot, try not to blink, and do the show in one take. Just so we can do the show and make it more interesting. Now, in radio, the red light comes on, and Sean, who's ever running the board, or Owen, the producer's like, start talking. And that, and sometimes you guys know that you look up at the clock, you're like, is that thing broken? Has Tim Hake been messing around with the buttons again? It doesn't seem to have moved. So it's a challenge.
Although this morning it was more like, will John stop talking?
That's right.
Did you notice that we missed a couple of newscasts?
Look who's
because
talking.
John
Tom
just kept
Tagney, who walked us
talking?
through his entire life.
So, Linda, here's a question from Jay Hubby of Everett. Did you marry the guy that said, "Oh, you're the news chick"?
No. Oh, God, no, I didn't marry him. No. The news chick is a name.
Side.
When I first heard that, I absolutely hated it because it was the first guy I ever worked with in radio, and I was out of college, and I had my new degree, and I was so excited I was going to change the world. And he met me, and all he said was, "Oh, you're the news chick." And that was 25 years ago. And I was pretty devastated, although in 25 years I've mellowed a bit. I don't take myself as seriously, even though I take information seriously. And so when I wanted to get on social media, Tom, listen carefully, this is important. Social media, Twitter, Facebook, I needed a name that wasn't my name because my name was taken, and I didn't want to be Linda Thomas 37 or LT's Hot or something like that. So I tried to think of a name that made sense and described who I was without being my real name. And that name came back to me, only I liked it this time because I liked what it represented, an evolution for me. And news is pretty serious. Thank you. Chick is pretty fun and flirty, and you put that together, that's what I am. Do you like the name, The News Chick? I love it now. Thank you.
And I'll add, if you're tweeting tonight, hashtag KIRO Tour. Check it out. Everybody's tweeting. That's what I hear. Tom Tagney from Barbara McCandle. How many movies do you see per week?
Well, that's a great question. Until I got switched to this early morning show, which really makes going to movies at night tough when you have to get up at 3 in the morning.
They have matinees.
Up until then, I usually see about 3 movies a week. Now I see 2 movies a week if I can get one matinee and then one night. Otherwise, it's too tough. But on average, in a year, I'll see, between 200 and 250 movies. And the thing is, right now, I don't know if you guys see much of the Seattle International Film Festival. I know they occasionally have outreach shows in Everett and Renton and Kirkland. But this is a really busy time, and I usually try to get about 75 movies in those 3 weeks. So I get a big bulk of my movie going this time out. But yeah, it's a lot of movies.
I saw a little Curious George today.
Yeah, that's right. I had kids your age too once, but that was a long time ago.
Tom, does it hack you off when you can only see 2 movies a week and you see a lousy one? How do you feel?
No. Here's the thing: is that I think, and I hear from people all the time. I would guess that there are probably at least 30% of this audience would say, "I would kill to have that job, to be a movie reviewer." The thing is, you be careful what you wish for, because once you start reviewing everything that comes out, you realize that if 75% of anything is crap, when it comes to movies, it's more like 90% of everything is crap. So it's just part of the job. So what I do, just like everybody else who still loves movies, you find a reason to be interested in something that you don't think is very good. You find interesting reasons why things don't work, and occasionally you find the little gems that you can maybe introduce to the rest
You go
of
into the theater with low expectations and hope to be surprised?
Believe me, it helps, immensely, yeah.
So, Tom, I'm going to name the KIRO host. You name the movie character that best represents them.
Oh, boy, this is dangerous territory.
John Curley.
John Curley. Well, so here's how I'll take the question. If I was casting John Curley in a movie, if I had to find somebody to play him, I think John Slattery, the guy, the second in command on Mad Men, I think would be perfect for you. He's very dapper. He's very stylish. He's got that, the
Arctic Silver.
White. Yes, exactly. It's perfect. And he's
with the glasses,
he's also quite the womanizer. I don't know enough about your personal life, but I think he would play you to a T.
Dory Monson.
Oh, man. You are going to get me in so much trouble. I hope Dory isn't here tonight, is he?
Oh, he's here. He's listening closely.
Danny
Okay,
DeVito.
that's a dicey one. How about Joe Pesci? I think
And Rachel Bell.
Rachel Bell.
Also Joe Pesci.
Yeah, that's right. You know what I would do is if I could do a combination, I think the person I would cast to play her would be a combination of Sarah Silverman, who I think is fantastic, and she's the right sort of age and demographic. But I also, every time I hear Rachel on Ring My Bell, I also hear her channeling Lucille Ball. I think if you could combine those two personalities, you'd have Rachel.
Tim, in 34 years, you've had some really notable assignments. The execution of Ted Bundy, the arrest and conviction of the Green River Killer. You reported during the LA riots, the Waco, Texas standoff in the 90s. What story do you remember the most? Which story sticks with you?
I guess for sheer terror value, that would be the LA riots, because I remember standing in the KIRO newsroom. Back then, we had a combined KIRO television and radio news experience. Some would call it a failed out-of-the-box experience. But I remember they had gathered 3 or 4 of us. They were going to send down a combined TV and radio news team down to LA because the city was exploding. And they said, Tim, you're going. And somebody from the other side of the room says, could you find somebody more white to send down there? And I went down.
Could they?
I remember, well.
Apparently not.
I remember landing at the airport and going to get my rental car. I didn't know where to go. I looked out on the horizon. All I could see was smoke rising in the distance. And I said, I guess I'll go there. And I headed toward the middle of the mayhem. And I remember pulling up next to a fire truck. And I leaned out to ask the guy a question. He says, you know what? I'd keep my windows rolled up if I was you. And it was like that for several days. It was an amazing experience. And I remember Dave Ross and I both stayed at a hotel near the USC campus. And I remember they had a guy with a rifle on the roof to protect the facility.